Welcome to the Irish Occupational Therapy podcast, hosted by me, Jen Trzeciak,
and me, Aideen Ruttledge.
This podcast is dedicated to exploring the world of occupational therapy, sharing the latest research and techniques and providing insights into the many ways that occupational therapy can help people of all ages live more fulfilling and meaningful lives.
Whether you are a practicing occupational therapist, a student of occupational therapy, or simply curious about this fascinating field, this podcast is for you. We'll be interviewing experts in the field, sharing stories from the front lines of occupational therapy practice, and providing tips and advice for anyone looking to get the most out of their therapy.
So sit back, relax, and join us on this exciting journey into the world of occupational therapy in Ireland.
Today we welcome Lorraine Madden, award-winning educational psychologist, founder and clinical director of the Education, Psychology and Therapy Clinic based in Kilkenny, also known as the EPT Clinic. This is one of Ireland's only child and adolescent mental health service to offer neurodevelopmental therapy and assessment pathways for autism, ADHD, dyspraxia and more. She's a busy mum and wife in a neurodiverse family. Lorraine, you're very welcome to the Irish OT podcast.
Thank you guys, Aideen and Jen. I'm delighted to be here this morning.
Great. So Lorraine, we're going to talk today about your professional expertise and experience in supporting young people with, we'll start off with school-based anxiety. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of what school-based anxiety is?
I'm sure. I might just give you a little bit of an introduction into why I'm so interested in it first, if that's okay. Because my journey into learning and psychology, it actually started when I was really young, and I can still remember the confusion and the overwhelm that I experienced when I started learning my tables and my spellings in primary school. Like from the age of probably about 7, I remember this game that they played every week where the entire class had to stand up, and then when you got a spelling or some correct, you could sit down. Well, ladies, I was always left standing, and I just learned differently to other kids, and I knew it even then. So I remember that anxiety. I remember the Thursday night not sleeping, being really worried about going into school on a Friday. And I knew I wasn't stupid because my parents had taught me I was clever and I was capable, despite getting like 20-30% every week on that dreaded spelling test. So I really remember that as a child, and I remember my interest at that stage being like, why is this so difficult, and why am I so able in other areas? Because sport, that was my remedy, sport and physical activity, and that's where I learned to regulate and to trust my body, and that's where I actually found confidence in sport and activity. And then in secondary school, I finally figured out how my brain worked, and I was lucky to have been able to harness that knowledge then, and that helped me succeed academically. But that's why I became really interested in learning and in being able to figure things out and how people think differently. So that, I suppose I can link that then, my own experience, to many of the young people that I meet in EPT Clinic. So what is school-based anxiety? So for me, I always think about experiencing kind of significant worry or overwhelm or distress, or even physical discomfort that happens either before, during, or after school. So I suppose a lot of people think of it just before school, but actually you can see it during the day sometimes, and then so many of the mums and dads and kids that come into EPT Clinic talk about it after, that kind of after school distress and the upset and exhaustion that happens when kids come home after school. And I see then through my clinical work that the young people usually communicate or show this overwhelm in a number of different ways. There's 4 ways that I would see a lot in the clinic. The first is through thoughts. So you'll see kids saying things like, oh, I hate school, it's so boring. I saw this recently with a little ADHD, a young boy who had internalized this. He'd internalized that he hates school and that it was really boring. But when we unpacked that, a lot of it was just about him getting in trouble for his busybody, that he was finding it really difficult. So thoughts is one thing that I would definitely keep an eye out for, and I would get mums and dads and caregivers and teachers to keep an eye out for that. The second is the feelings part, young people showing worry or anxiety. So that can be manifested in lots of different ways. One of the young people that I supported recently, just as she pulled into the school gate every morning, just as she arrived into the car park, she threw up every morning. So we we had to work around that and set up a new routine and look at it holistically in terms of all the different places that were associated with this routine of going into school, and we were able to support that young person, and she is now going in without throwing up and she's quite happy going in. But that was that feeling of anxiety, and then that links nicely to the third, which is sensations. Headaches, feeling sick, like needing to physically move, even physical tension or body rigidity sometimes. I'm just thinking of a teenager that I worked with about 2 years ago, and he used to physically get very stiff in his body. His shoulders would creep up around his ears. He used to put his hood up to reduce that sensory input. So his whole body was stiff when he was going into school, and then he was getting a lot of shoulder pain. So a lot of physical sensations can be associated with that school-based anxiety. And then the fourth is the responses, and actually this is what most people see. This is when young people say, no, I'm not going in, or I want to escape, or I want to go home, and we'd see that in lots of different ways, depending on what the young person is communicating, whether they're trying to avoid it, or whether they're acting out, or whether they're communicating their distress, physically or emotionally. And the difficulty is, in my work with parents and seeking support around school-based anxiety, is that we're seeing it more and more. It's probably one of the main concerns that bring people to the clinic or to the multidisciplinary team, and it regularly comes up during the 10-week emotional regulation program, during assessments, and then during the online membership.
And Lorraine, you spoke yourself about your own experience of that that pressure of the Friday tests. What are other contributing factors do you feel at the minute in everyday life in Ireland here for children who are experiencing school-based anxiety?
Yeah, it's a good question, because you hear lots of people talking about avoiding or refusing going to school. But for me, the reality is that most school-based anxiety is about safety seeking, whether that's relational safety in the relationships or environmental safety in terms of trying to find a safe place to feel that your sensory needs and your physical and your biological needs are met. And as human beings, that's so normal. Safety seeking is one of our core drives in life. It is the basis of all attachment and all survival behaviors, from the very moment that we're born to the very moment that we die. It's one of our core objectives in life as human beings, is to find safety and to maintain safety. So then when our children don't feel safe in school for a range of emotional, psychological, and sometimes physical reasons, they do what all humans are wired to do. Their fight, flight, freeze is activated. They avoid what seems unsafe. Their heart rate increases. Their threat scanning system or sensory system becomes heightened, and their limbs may become stiffer. And the related difficulties then are sadly just too familiar to all the mums and dads and teachers and professionals across the country who are supporting children with school-based anxiety.
I'm wondering, I guess a lot of parents and teachers might say anxiety is on the rise, though, and we're seeing it more and more children are not going into school or are anxious about school. Is it on the rise, or is it more that we're getting better at spotting it and recognizing it?
Yeah, there is a lot of talk about prevalence, isn't there? Unfortunately, statistics on the prevalence of school-based anxiety or school avoidance, it's quite limited in Ireland. Precise national statistics, for example, from the NCSE or the Department of Education, they're not readily available at the moment. So there's definitely a need for better data collection in that regards. But there are some indicators of growing concern. So, for example, Parent Line, which is an Irish support service, they did report in 2022 that there was nearly 10% of all of their calls were in relation to school refusal or school related concerns. And they also reported that the number of calls had actually doubled um, from 2020 to 2022, which is certainly something that I would see reflected in the clinic as well with teenagers and children and the parents that I work with. I do also think though that it's really important to talk about the pandemic when we're talking about increased school-based anxiety. Um, when I was doing my research for this podcast, I came across a really interesting publication. It was only published very recently. It's called The Impact of the COVID-19 Pandemic on the Education of Children with Special Educational Needs. It was published by the NCSE. And it was really far reaching in terms of it included school principals, teachers, SNAs, parents, and actually students themselves. And it was across both mainstream and special school settings. And the paper found that participants reported an increase in social anxiety and a decrease in social abilities with students, particularly students with special educational needs, after the school closures. Principals said that school closures had negatively impacted students' well-being, and mainstream principals believed particularly that there was negative effects for children with special educational needs. They reported it was more pronounced. Special school principals also reported an increase in school refusal after the pandemic. And then some students themselves with special educational needs reported that they were finding it difficult returning to school. They were apprehensive about meeting their peers again. There was a preference for many of them to continue learning at home. Then from parents' perspectives, they reported that children with special educational needs had their attitude change, which I thought was interesting, that they noticed a change and a loss of interest in school following the reopening of schools. And then there was a finding around the children who were transitioning from primary to secondary school. That was quite difficult. And then overall, there was 36.9% of school principals who reported lower attendance since schools reopened after the pandemic. So some really interesting findings there that it would be lovely to do further research on or follow up on that. But it certainly shows that I suppose before and after picture quite helpfully, and might inform maybe some of the supports next year, because it's a very recent publication.
I suppose it gives insight into, again, that safe space, that element of safety that we spoke about, Lorraine.
Totally.
Children and young people got the opportunity to learn in their safe space. So it's so insightful, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know what? What was the pandemic? It was a very unsafe thing. It communicated the world is unsafe. There's scary germs out there. There's things out there that can make you sick and hurt you and make you unwell. It really communicated a lot of unsafe thoughts and facts to young people about being out in the world. Like, you have to stay home, you have to not touch things, you have to stay with your family, you have to wash your hands loads. So it did communicate all these subconscious messages to our young people. We might not have said it directly to them, but certainly a lot of them picked up on it. I see it with my own little boy. He still washes his hands when he's a little bit anxious, because during the pandemic in school, they all came in and washed their hands every morning, and they had to wash them again before lunch when they returned to school. He was in junior infants at the time, so they went in as soon as they were allowed, and they had to put on hand sanitizer and things that little 5-year-olds, it's a lot to take on. And the messages, you have to do these things to be safe. So yeah, it's really interesting to think about what young people learned during that time.
Lorraine, you mentioned the research there around children with special educational needs, but in terms of school-based anxiety, I wonder, that can strike anyone with any needs or none, I guess. Is there any kind of characteristics or themes among young people who experience school-based anxiety that you would have noticed or been aware of?
Yeah. Um, I've seen a lot of children who are just deeply feeling children, like highly intelligent, highly responsible, caring, thoughtful. Children, or children that have maybe sensitive sensory systems that take in a lot of information, perceptive children, and that can be impacted by anxiety because they're worrying about what's going to happen and they're thinking about what's going to happen next. And then research does suggest that there are higher levels of anxiety amongst children who are neurodivergent, meaning children who see or experience the world differently to the majority, children whose sensory systems or social systems just process information in a different way. So statistics show that 1 in 5 children are neurodivergent. So that's 20% of the population when you think about it, which includes those who are autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, dyspraxic, Tourette's, and other developmental or learning differences. So I suppose we know that there's a higher uh, probability of children that are neurodivergent presenting with anxiety. So I think, again, it's good to keep that in mind when you're supporting a class and supporting children getting into school.
So for a teacher with 25 kids in a class, probably a fifth of them or 5 of them will have some kind of neurodivergence.
Correct.
And then
Correct.
probably a higher proportion will have some kind of mental health needs as well, potentially in terms of anxiety or in terms of mood. So that's a lot for teachers to be aware of and to juggle.
It is. And I suppose just what you said there about 1 in 5 is going to have mental health needs. We all have mental health needs.
Yeah.
Like 100% of people have a mental health, and 100% of people need to nourish their mental health in the same way that we need to nourish our body. So yeah, I think being aware of that. There is a lot though on teachers, and as an ex-teacher myself, I fully appreciate the stress and the demand on teachers at the moment, trying to juggle everything. It can feel like a lot, and I would see a lot of that in the schools too. I feel like a lot is arriving back to the school because children aren't getting their assessments in a timely manner. Children aren't accessing multidisciplinary supports. It's really difficult to get school psychology support. So a lot ends up being held between the school and the home, which is difficult, because neither parents nor teachers have the training to do all the other therapeutic stuff, but actually a lot of it's coming back and being held by those two people, very important people in a young person's life. But that's a lot for those adults to hold.
Lorraine, is there any small things, any small takeaway pieces that you could offer for teachers that they can change their practice and put small changes into place in their classrooms to support young people who have school-based anxiety?
Absolutely. I've seen schools and professionals and families work really wonderfully in a proactive, empathetic and collaborative way, and I have seen it really work. There's 7 kind of top tips that I would recommend for parents, professionals and families to keep in mind when they're supporting young people around school-based anxiety. I suppose the first I would say is to be aware of the signs early on if you can. Like if children are becoming negative about school, keep in mind those 4 areas that I mentioned earlier with the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations and the responses. So to just be tuned in to your young person and how they're thinking, they're feeling, and they're experiencing school. And then keep an eye out for things like changes in eating, sleeping or self-care habits during the school term. Keep an eye out for things like missing days or complaints around physical symptoms, headaches, stomach aches. They can often be anxiety related. And then the more obvious emotional distress before, during and after. So to be aware of those signs and to flag them early on, and to try and be as proactive in addressing any of those signs before they develop or become more increased, I suppose, in terms of the intensity. The second thing I would say is to be flexible and be patient. I think that it can be quite a stressful thing when there's school-based anxiety presented for everyone. So I would say to the adults to not take it personally. Often there's that natural piece around being a parent and saying, come on, you have to go in and this is what's good for you, and you'll see your friends, and all of that natural kind of advocatory piece that parents do. Actually, if your child is feeling unsafe and is feeling anxious, just being with them in that is more helpful. And it's tricky to step into that sometimes because you want to advocate for your child. That's so natural, and you want to encourage them and you want to champion for them, but actually that can minimize how they're feeling sometimes. So stepping into that, look, I can see you're feeling really worried now, and I'm with you in that, I'm here for you. That can be just transformative in terms of supporting a young person. And then similarly for teachers to also, and it's hard to actually do this sometimes, is not to take it personally, because your job is so personal if you're a teacher. Again, as an ex-teacher, I know that I used to think about the lessons, and I used to think about every child that I was teaching for the year, and I would be creating things for them. And if a child didn't want to come into my room, I would have been really upset about that. But actually, it's often a reflection of many things combining rather than one person or one relationship. So it's to kind of maintain that flexible and open approach and understand that every child is unique and they're going through their own experience and their own journey, and that one size fits all doesn't work with many children, and that a little bit of problem solving is absolutely okay, and to celebrate small wins as you go along. My third tip is around culture for everyone. So it's kind of following on from that patient approach. It's to foster that culture of support. And again, this should include everybody, teachers and parents and the young people, because it can be a stressful experience. I suggest setting up like a small team to wrap around the child in response to school-based anxiety, with maybe the principal, the SEN team, and the classroom teacher, SNAs, parents, professionals where they're involved, and the young person where that's appropriate. I'm not talking about like taking lots of time, because I'm quite a practical person and I'm in and out of supporting young people all the time. Like a 10-minute online meeting once a week to review like what worked well in the week and what didn't can be really helpful. And using something simple like in EPT clinic, we use the COT model. We say C for be curious about what was going on for the young person this week, observe what worked and what didn't, and then tweak something small, change something small, and then go back and be curious again, COT. Show compassion to parents and to children. So to communicate acceptance, simple phrases like, I understand this is really hard. We are there with you every step of the way. We're going to take this at your pace. And to say something like, to reassure parents and young people that you see the effort, something like, we see how much your child is trying. We understand there's a lot going on. We're here for you. Even writing those kind of phrases down and saying them like once every 2 weeks is super helpful. Sometimes we assume acceptance, but we don't actually show it. And we as adults, when we're going through a difficult time, and young people too, we actually do need to hear it and see it. And then I think it's also important to remember that schools, in my view, they work very, very hard to resolve school-based anxiety, often with minimal to no support from psychologists or therapists. So showing an appreciation for everyone that's involved and fostering that personal connection can be really helpful. And that can be very difficult if you're a parent that feels that your child has been let down by the school. because you're just stressed yourself and you need to work really hard if you need to manage all of these relationships. But I have found that's a key to success in solving these difficulties, because we're all human, and teachers usually get into this profession because they deeply care about young people. They want to help, their level of commitment. It's there all the time, and that they can be impacted and they can feel emotionally about things like school-based anxiety, not to the same level, but in a similar way to parents and young people. So my advice is to keep everyone's feelings and that human safety-seeking element in mind when you're putting a plan in place, and then encourage open communication and normalization, and the school principal to support all of that within the schools.
I'm just wondering, one thing that I'm thinking about for a lot of parents is, the kid in the car on the way to school and you cannot get them in, or, parents are really wondering about, do I push them to go in and make them go in because we've got Tusla in the background with our 22 days going, oh no, I might get a referral. And also we know that, it can be really positive for children to be in school. For parents, how much do they push a child who's feeling anxious to go in, or how much do they go, okay, we'll let you have the day off or time off? And, what are the alternatives? What are the options for parents?
Oh, it's such a good question, and it's something that so many parents face, that piece. So for me, I feel well-being above all else, and I do prioritize connection above just conforming for the sake of it, because we do know that a highly aroused, highly anxious or distressed child is not going to be able to learn or socialize, because literally the frontal lobes, that section of the brain that's required for learning and executive functioning, it turns off when they're very distressed and very anxious. So our approach within the team is to work with the family and the school in order to make school feel more comfortable, more safe for the young person, so that they can experience brain-body balance in the school environment. So that moment in the car where you're asking them to separate, that's probably not the place I'd begin with the support or with the plan. I'd be zooming out and I'd be thinking, okay, what happened, for the last week in school? What happened for the week at home? Let's look at the morning routine. Let's look at the evening routine. Let's look at the environments, and let's look at the collaboration between home and school. And I'd be putting, I suppose, a more holistic plan in place to help to get that child into a place where they're in a physical, psychological and emotional state that they're going to be able to leave that car with confidence, head into school. They still might need some scaffolded support, and for example, a transition object or transition activity, that would all be unpacked as part of the plan. And I think that brings us back to the fourth point. You do need to put time and resources into relationships, in terms of that fourth tip around supporting young people. Like, often that kind of proximity seeking behavior that we see, which is exactly what you were talking about there, Jen, staying with the parents, staying in the car, that's a huge part of school-based anxiety. That's an attachment and safety seeking behavior. So we do need to set up an alternative safe base for the child to transition from one safe place and person to another safe place and person. Children that are well able to just head into school and enjoy themselves, they're able to do that more easily, but other children do need support. And it's just a matter of figuring out what needs to be tweaked. Is it the structure? Is it the transition? Is it the morning routine? Is it the school routine? Is it do we do something about the environment? It's about figuring all of that out. And that brings us to the fifth point, which is collaboration with families. That's a key point in any sort of step forward in helping children with school-based anxiety, is enabling parents and caregivers to be part of the process, to build that strong non-judgmental partnership with families, working collaboratively with them, sharing strategies, resources, and finding out what tweaks in the environment might help to be put in place. Well, the sixth tip I would say is get help if you can then. And I say that with a caveat, because I'm so conscious from working with schools that it's very difficult to get help for the education system at the moment. It's very hard to get access to the NEP psychologist or the special needs coordinators team or the professionals from the HC. But ideally, the research shows that when we have that multidisciplinary support, that is what's best. So it's certainly good to ask and to seek that out, or to collaborate with other organisations in the area or other professionals. The CYPSC have good resources online, for example. NEPS have some very nice resources. They're available for download through the Wellbeing section of the Department of Education. So there is a lot of resources being produced at the moment, and we also run a weekly membership where parents can sign up for a month or 2 months and can access the multidisciplinary team once a week. We run that at low cost. It's actually €15 a week. And then all of those people, ideally, if you had your NEP psychologist and your team and your people that are involved in supporting the young person, they would come together, create a plan that's multifaceted, and then you'd work through that. But as I said, caveat with that, I know
ideal.
schools find that so hard.
I think it's really difficult to access resources. But I wonder, for parents, even just talking to other parents, that could just peer support, knowing that you're not alone in difficulties, can be really valuable, can't it? Because
for
it
sure.
is a tough system to navigate. So knowing
hard.
what's available locally, other parents will be in a good place to advise.
Yeah, for sure. And I would think, when I would be saying get in the help, I'd be saying that the school if as well. Often the principals will be able to request all of those pieces. Now they mightn't be provided for the school or the young person. But yeah, if there is a good support network, or there's fantastic parent groups or parent meetups, there's a lot of community-based supports, and even going to your GP, like your GP might be able to know of something that's happening in the area, can be really helpful as well. And then my 7th tip is the embed social and emotional learning. So, if you do get your young person in and there is a little bit of success, to hold that holistic social, emotional and regulation framework in mind as you're supporting them in school, like teaching around normalizing feelings, managing big feelings, bodily sensations, teaching things like the breathing and the regulating, the journaling, the grounding exercises, maybe having a peer support set up like in the school, anything that you feel will reduce that anxiety for the young person, so that once you get them in, once the plan is working, that you actually put another step, the final step in place to create that resilience and that long-term success.
They're really practical tips, Lorraine, because I know from working with some parents that they're in just total firefighting panic mode when they see the amount of days of being absent building, and it just feels like everything's spiraling out of control. But the takeaway message from all of those 7 tips is to just take a step back and to focus on the basics around your relationship with your child, and building up that team around to try and support them in taking them as they are at the minute and the situation as it is, and not trying to fight against it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a big believer in one day at a time with small steps. And that if you can do something small that builds confidence and that builds connection and builds a step towards your goal, that's enough, and if you get that little step again the next day and another little piece, that things do change. It just sometimes takes patience and calm. And I think for parents as well, for parents to know to trust their gut, often, as a mammy and a daddy and a caregiver, you have that gut around, do you know what, they're ready for it today, or they're not ready for it, or that they're just not in the place that they're going to be able to settle, and to communicate that with the teachers and with the school. And then similarly for teachers to also trust their insights and their observations and to share that back. Like, that process of communication in itself can lead to ideas and tweaks that can be very powerful and helpful.
Thank you so much for all of that today. The time has just totally flown. We really appreciate all of your expertise and advice in this area. It's going to be really helpful to other professionals and also to any parents listening, and indeed maybe even some young people listening that are experiencing school-based anxiety at the minute.
Absolutely, no problem. And if people want to hear anything else from me, they can go to my Instagram account. We talk a lot about school-based anxiety, and I give a lot of content and supports and resources away for free there.
That's all for today's episode on the Irish Occupational Therapy podcast. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and found it informative and engaging. If you've any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at irishotpodcast@gmail.com or connect on Instagram or Facebook.
And remember to subscribe to our podcast so that you never miss an episode. If you found this episode helpful, please leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback is important and helps us to improve the show, so please do leave it. Thank you for listening to the Irish Occupational Therapy podcast, hosted by myself, Jen Trzeciak.
And myself, Aideen Ruttledge.
We look forward to sharing more insights and knowledge with you in future episodes. Until then, take care.